Greetings, YouTube. My name is Justin Ormsby. I'm a music educator in the Southwest Missouri region. I just recently had a very lengthy conversation with a friend and colleague of mine named Jonathan Hall, who is a brilliant music educator in the Panhandle area of Florida. And he asked me to put together a short little talk about No Child Left Behind. In particular, this idea. In all my years in education, as a student, as a professional, and so on and so forth, I've rarely, if ever, met a professional educator that was overly supportive of the policies that No Child Left Behind put forth. That thought that No Child Left Behind was what was best for our students, that thought that it promoted a high quality of education, and so on and so forth. Yet, um, No Child Left Behind was signed into law in 2001. And while there are politicians that advocate for the rewriting of No Child Left Behind, and there are even some politicians that advocate No Child Left Behind be scrapped completely and replaced with something else, the fact remains that 9 years after No Child Left Behind was put into law, it maintains enough political support that it continues to be our federal education policy in this country. So the question is why this great divide? Why is it that professional educators have such a different idea of what is successful education policy than do professional politicians? Well, I was recently approached by a couple people that thought they knew the answer to this question. And both of them tried very, very hard to convince me that it was a conspiracy. The first person tried to convince me that the federal government passes poor quality education policy intentionally so that they can maintain an uneducated populace. The reason being that an uneducated populace is essentially no threat to the intellectual and power elites. The second person had a conspiracy theory of his own, but he put that conspiracy theory more towards the right side of the political spectrum. His idea was that conservative politicians are trying to discredit public schooling in this country so that they can move towards the privatization of education in this country. And while both of these ideas are interesting, I think they're also both inaccurate. And the reason that I think that is because it's my opinion that if education were a business, the policies put forth in No Child Left Behind would be extremely successful. If you think of it this way, let's say there are 100 factories in this country that produce widgets, and the federal government decides one day that they're going to take it upon themselves to ensure that this country only produces high quality widgets. So it would make sense then to go into the factories that produce widgets and find out which factories are producing high quality widgets and which factories are producing inferior quality widgets, and then go to those factories that are producing poor widgets and say, okay, we're going to give you some money to buy some new widget making equipment and hire some new widget making professionals, and we're going to do that for a couple of years, and then we're going to come back and we're going to reassess your widgets. And if your widgets are still of a poor quality at that point, we're just going to fire all your widget makers and all your widget making supervisors, and we're going to replace them with people who have a better track record for quality widget production. That's just quality control in the business world. That makes sense. But the problem is that education is not a business. It doesn't function well as a business, and it really should never be thought of that way, because the product that's being produced in education is a person. It's a human being, and human beings are infinitely more complex than anything that could ever be produced in a factory anywhere in the world. No Child Left Behind's biggest mistake is that it fails to realize that complexity. It takes a very narrow approach to defining what it means to be educated. And while the federal government leaves it up to the states to produce the assessment, the test, that'll gather the data to see which school districts are effective and so forth, because we have to test quantitatively, and because we have to test every student, a lot of the state tests have a lot of similarities, and one of the most unfortunate similarities is that those tests tend to be multiple choice, fill in the bubble tests, that really don't assess anything except for someone's ability to mindlessly regurgitate data. In my opinion, I think that there is much more that's involved in creating educated and successful human beings. Things like creativity, for example, can't be tested by fill-in the bubble tests. Things like the ability to come up with unconventional answers to conventional questions not only can't really be assessed quantitatively, um, but as far as high-stakes standardized testing goes, that sort of thinking is discouraged because in a multiple-choice fill-in-the-bubble test, you have one question with one right answer that a computer is going to grade as either right or wrong. There's no partial right. There's no way to tell whether a student interpreted a question differently and offered a unique but equally valid answer to that question. It can't be done. But all the problems with No Child Left Behind, that's probably best left for a different video because it could take some time. My point here is that I think politicians are doing everything that they can to better education in this country. But they're thinking of education like a business, and that's never going to be effective. In one way, you can hardly blame them. A lot of politicians were very successful business people before they became politicians. That's how they could afford to run for office. They were groomed differently than educators were, and they see the world through a business-like perspective. Even those politicians who weren't business people before they got into politics, well, politics itself is very business-like. Just the nature of politics much closer resembles a business than it does education or school. So, once again, my point is that I don't think it's a conspiracy. I don't think it's nearly that deep-seated or that evil. I think politicians just have, generally speaking, of course, have just a fundamental misunderstanding of what education is and what needs to be done to ensure students receive a quality education. The other thing I think you have to consider is that politicians' number one job is not to pass good policy. That stuff is important to them. I'm not so cynical that I would say that it's not. But their number one job is to get reelected. And I mean, that's how they keep their job. That's how they keep their paychecks. And No Child Left Behind looks very good on paper, and it sounds very good in a speech. If I were running for office, I'm convinced that I could get a lot of votes simply by standing up in front of a large crowd of people and saying, I fought to ensure that every child in this country or this state or whatever received an equal and high quality education. And I'm going to make sure that every teacher and every administrator in every school district is accountable for that child's education. That sounds amazing. But education is not that simple. The human mind and the brain and what it takes to be successful and educated, it's just not that simple. But again, I don't want to rant. The point of this is that that's my understanding of the Great Divide and why it exists. It's just a fundamental misunderstanding of what education is, and the only people that really have a good grasp on what education is and how it should be are educators. And nobody seems to be asking us about policy. But again, that's for another day. If you have questions or comments or opinions or whatever, please send them to me. You can get a hold of me at my personal website, which is Justin Ormsby, ORMSBY.com, one word, or the educational website that my friend Jonathan Hall and I put together called onechanceToLearn.net. That's the number one chance, the number two learn.net. My contact information is on all of those. I really do think that we grow more via an amalgamation of ideas, whether we agree with them or not. So if you have something to say or to offer, please send it to me, and it'll give me something to consider. I don't offer this to you as my idea of what's correct. It's just an opinion and something that I think is worthy of consideration when you're thinking about these topics. I guess that's all I have. Until next time.